we have a lot of you, this is relatively new. Even Christians that have been Christians for a long time, their strategy in how to win people to the Lord, if they employed the same strategies in how they invest their money, they would be broke. So we want to find a way that will bear fruit, much fruit. If you're willing to invest your life in working for something where you get no return. Okay, so Jesus said, store up treasures in heaven. He didn't say to go to heaven bankrupt. And there's only two things that you take to heaven with you. One is what Christ has done in your soul. Someone once said that the only currency of heaven is humility and the likeness of Christ. But the other thing you get to take with you are people whose eternal destinies have been changed because you partnered with God. So just to set your theology straight a little bit, let your brain stop doing little gymnastics that people do, is like, does God save people or is it just people save people? For a start, human beings don't save themselves. They're deaf, blind and dumb. Dead people don't raise themselves from the dead. And they're spiritually dead. But nor does God save them on his own. I believe in the sovereignty of God, and I believe that God foreordains people to salvation. But this sovereign God, quite clearly in the scriptures, has sovereignly chosen the means by which he will save people, and he's limited himself and his power to operate through his sons and daughters on the earth. You can see that so clearly in the scriptures. And even for therefore go into the whole world and make disciples. Or 2 Corinthians, just a quick read through 2 Corinthians 5 is we have been given the message of reconciliation. So your good life won't cut it. And we've been given a ministry of reconciling people to himself, as if God was making his appeal through us. So what do you think that means? That means God's limited himself to make his appeal through us. Therefore, we are part of the equation that's going to result in other people being saved, not just God. And if we rely upon bringing people to church and assimilating them in the hope that someone will call them brother or sister before they even know the Lord, and therefore short-circuit their whole journey that God intended for them, that's the way in which we fill the church with Ishmaels and dilute the spiritual power of the church, which is what's happened. The only way out of that is that God's servants and God's people each learns to be equipped to make disciples, because Jesus' last command should be our first priority, to go and make disciples. So no matter what we think our calling and our gifting is, it has to come under that umbrella of making disciples. And therefore, it should be a Christian's great life pursuit and great occupation in learning how. So how many of you have invested a lot of time in learning how to make money, get by? You spend, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years in primary school? Queensland, I can't work it out. A while. Then, Amish in grade 8, they're out. Pointless. They don't see the point in algebra. You know what I mean? But algebra is important. Okay, well, can you tell me what the relevance is? X squared plus y, x squared equals y squared plus z squared or whatever. Or a plus squared plus b squared equals c squared. Who knows what that is?
No one knows what that is.
What is it, Peter?
Pythagoras.
That's right, the formula for the area of a triangle.
Wow.
But how many of you use it? You know what I mean? Algebra is very useful for some people who know how to use it. I use it all the time. But the point is, most of you don't. You learnt stuff you didn't use. Most of the stuff you learned at school you didn't use. But also you can go to uni, and you go to uni so you can get a career. But some of you have spent 13, 14, 15 years preparing for a career and a lot of learning for something that as soon as you cross the threshold into eternity will mean absolutely nothing. And I want to read this to you by Charles Finney. Now, he says it more bluntly than I would. So, I'm glad you're sitting down. Make it an aim of constant study and of daily reflection and prayer to learn how to deal with sinners so as to promote their salvation or their conversion. It is the great business on earth of every Christian to save souls. People often complain that they do not know how to take hold of this matter. Why, the reason is plain enough. They've never studied it. They've never given it any time. They've never taken the proper pains to qualify themselves for the work. And if people made it no more a matter of attention and thought to qualify themselves for their worldly business, then how would they then they do to save souls? And how do you think they would succeed? Now, if you are thus neglecting the main business of life, what are you living for? Is that a good question? If we're neglecting the most fundamental, needful thing on the planet right now, people who know where they're going can take other people there, then if we're not about that, then what are we about? And if you do not make it a matter of study how you may more successfully act in building up the kingdom of Christ, you are acting in a very wicked and absurd part as a Christian. And I'll quote you something further down the page. Never was an angel employed in a more solemn work than that of dealing with sinners who are under conviction. How solemnly and carefully then should Christians walk, how wisely and skillfully work, if they do not wish to be the means of the loss of a soul. So this is what we're about in this series. Becoming equipped to take as many people to heaven as we can and make our life count while we're here. So now, many of you are in a place where you're starting to realise this and step across the line and say, Lord, you can have my life. Your purposes are now my purposes, and his dreams start to get into your own heart, and you start to taste of the eternal reward of when you take on his purposes, then something else gets added to your life, and you get enlarged in a way that's not just the benefit of other people, but you benefit and you start to grow. And some of you having the initial tastes of that, and there's all sorts of interesting things when you enter the fray. Just like any war, I think when soldiers went through their, what was they called, basic training in America, and then they landed at Normandy, they had a little reality adjustment with the difference with what they were expecting and the reality of what they were facing. And some of you are also at a place where bullets are whizzing around and you're getting a few flesh wounds. And you're going, what is this? Or you suffer the loss of a soul. Or you see fruit and something grows within you. So I thought we'll start with Brig and then we get Mel, and I'll take it from here. Just in their journey from here to there. From a place where they thought, I'm a committed Christian because I compare myself with people that are completely backslidden. And so my semi-lukewarm backsliddenness looks really spiritual, but I'm still all about myself in this church environment, and how God got me from there. That's really, wow. We're going to start from there, huh? And get me from there, which all of us were at one stage, and gets us into his purposes and what happens, yeah?
Not quite, but that's in there as well.
No, you share your own journey.
Ah, cool. I thought you said I was going to start.
No, you're going to start with. You start with where you've got prepared.
Cool. Now I'm gonna whip through some pages in and out, and if I sort of start stuttering a bit, it's because I have a few notes that are dealing with other matters that are not for tonight. So, so I'm gonna just be very conscious not
It'll be
to
so
say
obvious.
those
We'll pick
things.
it. Okay, we know what you're talking about. All right.
Some might not. Anyway, I think firstly it's necessary to point out that from my part, what Paul is saying is you make it a significant study to how to work with people. So it's worth mentioning that it's something that I haven't sort of explored the depths of that. So this is mainly just my journey from what I was like before to the things that I experienced during the time when I was, I suppose you could say, feeling challenged to take that next step, and to what life was like after that. So it is mainly just my personal journey that I hope you'll be able to at least pick out a few things that would apply to you. If there isn't anything that applies, that's well and good. But anyway, I guess like the first starting point is, I guess I'll start off with Paul left off earlier. It's like when you're in a big church environment, a big group, it's like the level and how you, I guess, like view your progress. So from my part, it's sort of comparing myself with other people. And generally when you're comparing yourself with other people, you tend to compare yourself with people that are doing worse than you. So you never really look at people that are seemingly doing better than you. And so when the, I guess like the normal life is, you know, hanging out, playing games and, you know, the normal Gold Coast culture that young people do, it's like then you become part of that and you do that as a way of life. But at the same time, you're very diligent in fulfilling your Christian duties. So you're actually a very good, committed person. So you actually know. So like in my case, it was like very early on, I was actually discipled well. So I was like, wow, this is great. Like I get to fix up my life. I get to work things out. I get to put things into perspective on how I want my life to be like. And other people, well, that's their business to figure that out. So it was never a thought that I now have the responsibility towards other people to say, well, this is the journey that I've started on, and I now need to take that on to other people and sort of help them on that journey. But it was more, you know, this is for me, great, I am going to take this on board, I'm going to learn from this, I'm going to grow from this, and I'm going to try, refine, and make my life as good as I can get it.
It's good.
So that's the first part. So it's like having a, and like for my case, it was like having a commitment of like this knowing of I should be doing more than what I'm doing, but then I would do that and I realized, well, this requires quite a bit of me and I'm not willing to make that commitment, so I'm gonna take a step back and look at that, life is good again, you know.
Vic, can I just interrupt for a minute?
Yes.
Could you not be so honest? Like,
It's good, Paul.
This is an environment that's sort of like 70% honest, so everyone feels okay. Is that right?
So I should dial it down a notch?
Yeah.
No, boo.
Well,
Keep going.
So I'm doing great. So that's me done for you. But yeah, so it was I just lost my.
You can pick it up again. Let's go on.
You're saying that you were brutal.
No, but it was, yeah, so, and that was actually a very constant thing where it's like, okay, I know what I need to do, so I'm going to do that. And I think like one of the lessons that, I've only learned this recently, but it's like one of the lessons that I've learned is that there are like different levels of, I guess like self-focus or selfishness, if you like, in that, like, you know, when you first believe in God, like one of the first things that, you know, someone that communicates that with you, they tell you that the two issues you have is selfishness and pride. So when you sort of step over that line and you know that God has done something in your life, you instantly assume that, oh good, my selfishness is dealt with. You know, so it's like, it's never a thought. So when you are, you know, like when you're sort of confronted with the choice of stepping into other people's lives, you don't actually think of it as, oh, I'm doing a selfless deed, because you are now a very good person, you're selfless, you don't have that problem anymore. But what makes you pull back is your life is still very much about yourself, but you don't actually realize that. So for me, I wasn't aware of the fact that I would step into someone's life and I'm like, oh, okay, it's a bit much. I'm going to step back and I'm going to be all about myself again, because life is good this way. But it was, so the initial stage for me having to step, I guess like take the step, was understanding that part and having that communicated to me in a real way. And this is, I guess this is when discipleship is very, very handy, because like I'm not sure if you had Paul say this before, but like a deceived heart doesn't actually know that it's deceived. So if you are unaware of certain things within yourself, you can't actually deal with them, and you operate as if it's not there. So like in my case, it was operating as if I didn't actually have a level of selfishness that was pulling me back from committing into something that was just not my life. Like, to step into someone else's life, to invest into someone else's life required a lot of my time, it required a lot of my effort, it required some of my money. Like, all of that stuff sort of adds up pretty quick, and you're like, it's not worth it, because the mindset is life is just about me, so I need to be able to put these things into perspective just for myself. So, and I guess, like, again, like, there'd be, you know, different people, different stages. So that's what I guess, like, my part was like initially. It's like this part where I was living in a different frame of what selfishness was like. Whereabouts life is about me, but I embraced the part of actually being discipled and actually getting my life in order. And like, that stuff was great. And certainly doing that, actually, it sort of aids the selfishness, because you do see yourself doing pretty well. You know, it's like, because people point out things in your life that you know, that you deal with and you go on, but then, and then so from that you compare yourself with other people that aren't in discipleship as much, so you're like, between the two, I like this life and I prefer this life, so I'll happily do that. But then there's another stage beyond that, which I would say towards the end of last year, beginning of the year, it was like when I was getting really challenged to step into that, which I would think, you know, some people will be there, other people won't, but like, you know, if it applies, then that's great. So, like, as I mentioned before, like, being in discipleship is highly helpful, because it is at this point, and I would have explained this before when I was talking about discipleship, one of the things that I personally found very useful is when you're discipled by people that know you really well, they challenge you into things that they know you have the potential to do. So you might not be aware of certain things, but they see the potential in what you can do and what God is calling you to do, and they call you up to live in that potential, if that makes sense. So it's like you're, you know, like, sort of living a few steps down, but they can see that your potential is a few steps forward, and they actually want you to live up to that. So they call you up to that. So it's how you receive that challenge, or I guess, like, that message, if you like, makes a difference on whether or not you are going to actually step into that, or you're going to choose to live life to yourself.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So at the end of the year last year, beginning of the year, I think like what happens, especially during holidays, like, you have a lot of free time. Like, anyone have that problem? It's like, no? Well, lucky for you.
Yeah.
But like, during the holidays, like, you have like an insane amount of free time, because I think I had like 4 weeks off work, and probably like what I would have done more than anything else was, you know, play some games. Like, we're good Christian people, like, you play good games, like, you know, cards, yeah, thank you, or Monopoly or whatever, and you go watch movies, and obviously you attend some, you know, Christian gathering, because you gotta keep that going. But like, overall, it's like, in your spare time, it's like, life is essentially just about you, like, what you want. So for me, the first challenge was actually being confronted with that. It's like, Bree, what are you doing with your time? Well, you know, fellowshipping. I don't know. But it was like, it was not being able to actually be accountable for what I was doing with my time, because I actually didn't know what I was doing with the time that was useful for other people. It was just what I wanted to do, like, what was good for me, or what didn't actually require, like, to get a group of people and play games doesn't really require a level of sacrifice for me at all. It's like, you know, you agree?
Well
That would
said.
challenge my organisational abilities, but okay.
Well, get someone else to organise it. It's like, it just fixes that problem. So it doesn't really require anything from your part to do that. So it's like, well, maybe sending out a text, that's really where you were struggling. Like, other than that, it's like, everything else is like, you just get people and you hang out and do stuff. And not to say that's bad, but if you do that all the time, well, it's a problem. So that was the end of last year for me and the beginning of the year. And the challenge then that I was faced with is being accountable for my time and realizing what I do with my time. And then I realized that it was really all about me and all that I wanted, and it wasn't, there wasn't anything beyond just me and dealing with the things that were happening in my life. Because as I said, like, the journey of discipleship for me has sort of been relatively consistent. So I've always valued that. So I would maintain that as a grade because I see it as a very significant part. So therefore, I've always kept that going. But in terms of then transitioning into doing that to someone else, that was always the thing that was holding me back. So the challenge to then step into other people's lives, because I had so much free time and all I was doing was playing games, was like, well, what are you going to do with that free time? And then this was the change. And it is very critical to be mindful of, I wrote down a few things. I only wrote down 3 things. There's probably more, but I only wrote down 3 things that came to mind that it's like for your growth and to do this well, because like that probably will happen to, most people, they have happened to people, so the 3 things that I put down is the drive to perform, because you're like, oh good, now this is what I need to do. So you're like, where's the people? I'm going to go there, I'm going to go here because this is what I'm supposed to do. So it's like that drive to perform, or, I'm just going to do this without actually having that genuine heart to actually genuinely love people and truly love people. But you're like, this is what I'm meant to do, so I'm going to do it.
So good.
And then there's a part of actually then having to compare yourself with other people. Right, how are we doing? Like, you got 3, I should probably get 1 more. I don't know.
So good.
No, you guys don't do that. Like, this is why Jazz and I work well, because it's like the 2 of us, Like, you don't have that problem.
Comparison's a dangerous game.
Very
It
dangerous.
is very much. So it's, and again, I'm going to keep referring back to discipleship because I think is like one of the things that I'll credit a great deal of what I've learned, because as I said before, it is when you're blind to something, you can't actually see it, and just because you can't see it doesn't mean other people can't see it. And it takes people that are really close to you, people that actually really know you, to point that out. So it's like if you are in that level of relationship, people can point those things out to you. So these things are bound to happen, and I'm sure they would have happened to other people. So if there's that person that's really close, they can actually point them out and say, hey, that's probably not healthy. And the last thing I had down was like a need for recognition. It's like people need to know what I'm doing. Like people, I'm working hard here, you know what I mean? Like need like what do you call it? Like one of those high chairs or something? Like
High chair?
yeah, like
Pedestal.
thank you, Mel. My words.
I just went straight to Emma. That's all right.
That's it.
That's where my brain went to. But yeah, so there's like 3 main things, and I'm sure there's more. Can you guys think of any more worth pointing out?
Just say that because they're really good points.
So there's obviously the drive for performance, there's comparisons, and there's the need for recognition.
So like drivenness to discipleship. Like,
As in like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do, therefore I'm
obligation.
going to go out to do.
It's I think you
It
kind
will
of
come
covered
under
it.
obligation in a way.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Good.
No,
Great.
good.
Is similar, isn't it?
Guilt.
A little bit.
Yeah, feeling the need to do that because that's what people say we should do.
Fear of man I believe the people that are discipling me have an expectation that I should
That
do
I have to
this.
do it. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
yeah.
It's like now there's an expectation that, oh, good, because that's what everybody else is doing, then I have to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like being mindful of those things because I think sorry, I'm going to have to go back because I actually prepared this over like 3 days, and in that space I wrote other stuff. This is definitely not gonna work. No, sorry, can't find the one that I'm trying to get in.
You just have to go on.
Oh no. Oh my gosh. Gonna need to get 2 different journals for this. I think that might be better. Anyway, so where was I? So those 3 main things. And I think like probably the greatest thing to be mindful of is like I think it's like the commandment that, like Paul mentioned, the commandment that Jesus gave, like, you know, go to all nations and make disciples. That's great, but I think the first, you know, like obviously we know the first and greatest commandment is like love the Lord with all your heart. So that is, if you have that as your starting base, it's like it's probably the safest way to avoid these 3 things, I would say.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like, because you're not gonna go out wanting to perform, but you're actually going out with a genuine love for people. So like, so for me, it wasn't like I'm gonna go out and alright, this is what they expect of me, let's do it. But it was like, it was making a choice of saying, this is how I want to live my life now. This is, I'm gonna, you know, like, because I believed all that stuff and I knew it was true. So it was a matter of actually fully committing to that and saying, well, I'm going to choose to do this because this is what God actually desires of me, because I love God and I want to do what pleases Him. So I'm going to step into what, you know, like what He's calling me to do, not because for some obligation that other people expect. And there's still, I guess, like that aspect of where people do call you up to something higher, they do call you up to something that, you know, like, I say probably since the start of the year, one of the most important things, because everything is just so significant in that, but it's like, for every, like I'll say young man mainly because I communicate to young guys, but it's like, for every young person to live a life of value, their life has to be beyond just themselves. Like, you have to live a life that's not just about you, but it's something much, much higher than yourself. And I think that would be something that I would constantly communicate, not because I think, you guys need to hear this, but it's more like I need to be mindful of that every time. It's like my life just needs to be so much bigger than just me and just what I want. I've got to take a hold of something that is so much greater, because then that creates room to expand into it instead of just narrowing it right down. That was a side note. I totally lost my thought again. Sorry.
That's not a side note.
It's not on my notes.
I don't know that.
Yeah, it just happened. Sorry, I just literally lost my thought. Anyone remember where I was?
You got to a point where you started giving your life away, and you realised my motives need to be not out of the fear of man, but out of the love for God, and that's where I want to come from. That's where I'm going, and then you started living that lifestyle. That's where.
Yes, yeah, thanks. So so we'll go from there, right? Actually, no. Like before heading to, I think I sort of touching on it a bit. So it's I guess like for every young person to really grow up, it's like and Paul will say this, I think Jeremy spoke about it last week as well, like they need to be taking a level of responsibility, and you do that pretty well for yourself, I will hope, but then it requires that you take a level of responsibility for other people. And so it's like when you step into someone's life, they don't know anything, they're sort of waiting on you to communicate something that will change their life. It's like, there's a level of responsibility that you now hold for that person, and that, without a doubt, would actually make you grow up. It's like I remember when me and Phil had their baby, I was like, oh my gosh, like I gotta change, like I gotta grow up. Like, what do you mean? I don't know, like something needs to change. But because I felt a level of responsibility to be, like to be a good role model, to be like someone that, when this baby grows up, they'll be like, oh, Brie, yes. Like I can be inspired that person. So it's like having that level of responsibility is a thing that people need to be able to actually grow up and take the full potential of what God is really calling them to.
It's good.
And so, yeah, anyway, so moving on to the next part, which is obviously taking like that step into, like, this is what God is calling me to, and I'm aware of that, and I'm now making the choice to live this way. And without a doubt, really, like, the most significant part of that is you're like now stepping into something that it's so much more serious than just hanging out with your friends and playing games. Now you're actually stepping into a part where God is now working with you to change someone else's life, and I don't think there's anything more serious than that any person can actually give themselves to. So it's like the level of serious-mindedness, the level of actually maturity for you to be able to step into that has to increase very, very quickly, because suddenly you realize it's like what I do doesn't just affect my life now, it now affects other people. Like I remember like one night I was like few weeks after we met Chris, and I was like, man, like if I spend some time with some people, you guys know I like having fun. Yeah, so like a little bit, it's like not over the top at all. Never. But it was like, yeah, true. But it was like this realization that there's certain things that I do, and because I've had bad experiences in the past too, so it was this certain things of realizing that there are actually certain things that I cannot do. Like there's certain things that I cannot say. It's like, I think easily the first thing was like, it is great to have fun, you know, but I need to know who my audience is, I need to know what the content of my humor is, and and every time I need to be switched on, in that I can't just say whatever with whomever because it's fun. It's like I now had to have a different level of self-control and actually realize that my actions, whether it's fun or whether it's bad, don't just affect me, they now affect other people. And because there's a level of actually taking that ownership and that responsibility in that, it's not something that I will take lightly at all. Like it wasn't anything that I can just be like, well, I'm tired, whatever, you know, but it's like, I have to be very disciplined, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things that I'm going to learn along the way, but it is sort of taking notice of that, of saying, there's this person, like, it's not that they're depending on you, but it's like that flow and effect of the things that you do will genuinely, you know, affect other people. And once you become conscious of that, I don't think there's anything more selfish than just doing it anyway. You know, it's like, so like after having made that decision to sort of step into that, it wasn't something that I then walked out and said, I've made a decision, now I'm going to go and find people. But there was a shift and a change within my heart that I started to live differently, even if there were no people around. Like I started having to use my time wisely, started having to be accountable for my time. And then like it wasn't long after that where like we obviously met Chris and we started having to journey with him in that part. But what that did is like, now there's somebody there and that person's like, well, tell me about God. And you're like, okay, like now I need to, like as I was saying, like I have, like, so I've got notes here that are dealing with 3 different things, you know, so it's like, now I have to be conscious of things that God is doing in my life, but I also have to be conscious of things that God is now doing in other people's lives. So it's like, I'm not just narrowed down to myself. So that level of selfishness just goes right out the window, because now you just have to be conscious of where the other person's at, what's God actually doing in that person's life. And it's extremely hard to do that if life is, you know, just about you and what you want.
Good.
So that was like probably the biggest wake-up call, when I'm realizing, okay, now I can't just go and meet Chris and then tell him about what God is doing in my life. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I hear this is great stuff. You know?
As for me,
As for me, like, I don't know about you, but life is good. But yeah, so there was a requirement, not a requirement, but like there was this urgency to, I guess, like quickly get on board with what God is doing, because once, you know, like what I'm not sure if anyone had met Chris, you know, at the start. It's like, Mel, thanks, Mel.
What?
The people, Jeremy, thank you. You would have met Chris before, surely.
Before what?
Before, you know, he sort of became Chris, you know. The old Chris. That Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You Christians are crazy, Chris.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's wrong with these people?
They seem normal, but
But
they
somehow
can't
they're
be because
crazy.
They're living God. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, so, again, lost my thought.
You wanted us to think about Chris in the early days for
I
some
did.
reason.
Oh, goodness gracious. I'm sorry. This was not meant to happen.
That's all right. You've got a few minutes now.
Okay, cool.
And
No
you were
pressure.
talking about how, like, when you meet up with Chris, it's not about,
Ah,
oh, look
yes.
at me, look at me. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, okay, Chris, this is what's been going on in my life. Like, I don't know about you. And like Chris had, it's like, it's an understatement to say he had lots of questions. It's like, so like, I plan on being home at 10, so. And I'm actually not joking at all. It's like it's a 3-hour park, dude. It is. It's like 3 hours and you're going to start paying. Yeah. And it's like $6 too once you go over the 3 hours. But anyway, the sacrifice has been made, I guess.
Oh.
Got 2 minutes.
But yeah, so it was then realizing that this person is now, you know, requiring something from you to, and also that God is actually now working through you to get this person to where He wants them to go. So that level of seriousness and that, like, serious-mindedness, I think it's like through the last couple months, like one of the most consistent themes that as guys we've been talking about, there's a level of serious-mindedness that when we're working with people, when we're dealing with people, that we just need to have that on every single time, because it is not something to like, I think I was talking with Paul on Sunday, it's like, it's not something that you do and be like, oops, well that didn't work, I'll try again. It's like, you can't do like trial and error like with people's lives. It's like, sure, there's certain things that you learn and it's not going to be everybody, but the attitude of your heart can be like, well, that didn't work, let's try something else. But there's this commitment to what God is doing, and you're going to be fully given over to that, and you're going to work with Him where He's working, and you're going to do His work, because it's, you know, like, and I'm going to steal this from what Callis said last week. It's like, and I didn't actually personally think of this, it's not on my notes, but it's worth mentioning. It's like when God places you in front of that person, you do actually become the most significant person in that person's life. You know, so it's like for Jeremy and myself, like when we met Chris and this is what he wanted to do, it's like, tell me about God, I want to know God. It's like, we instantly became the most significant people in his life, and we had to actually live up to that. Like, as in, we had to have a level of, I guess, like sober-mindedness that we can't play games with what's happening now.
So good.
And whatever the outcome is, well, that's between, you know, that was up to Chris to decide what he wanted to do, but we weren't going to rob him of the opportunity to make a good decision because of, you know, playing games.
It's good. Good, Rick.
But like, I guess like in saying that, there's like when you step into that life, there's obviously discouragements that you're going to come across where, and I've only noted 2 things on here that I guess like for me were the most apparent, and the first one is probably still, like, I won't class it as a discouragement, but it's something that's constantly with me regardless of, like, if I'm, you know, very, you know, serious-minded, talking to somebody about serious things, it's like I, you know, always feel the level of like insufficiency to deliver the message that's actually going to help this person go from where they're now to the next place. You know, it's like I feel like I'm doing my best, but I just don't think it's enough. You know, it's like, and like I'm not sure if anyone else has that problem.
Yes.
It's so universal.
No, you guys have
Big
fixed it.
time. All we say is get used to it.
Well, what Paul says is get used to it. It's not from me. But yeah, like that, and I think that stays with you. It's like you just don't. But I mean, I guess like once you start feeling that way, then
Well, for me, like this is where when you've got other people who are walking alongside of you, and you're all on the same page. For me, anyway, I have the benefit of going, hey, can you just help me out here, or can you just glean, you know?
you
So
just
that-
stole what I was gonna say next.
Oh gosh. Proceed.
Like,
She's helping you get to the end because you only got a few minutes.
we've only got a few minutes. Like, as in a Jeremy few minutes.
Your 10 minutes has gone 45. But yeah.
Yeah, but FY, Melody has to speak.
Sorry, Mel, I'm gonna quickly summarize. All right. So
No, just finish, don't summarise.
no, okay, no. You had it wrong. Well, like with every discouragement, you get encouraged with stuff. All right.
True.
So we get a few encouragements. I'm gonna read this. Yeah, like pretty much what Callie just said. It's like it's just seeing that when you step into that and you start living that way, you realize that God didn't just call you and say, "Oh, I want you to do this." You realize He's got people already doing that. He's got people there that are living that way, that are doing the same thing. So you're not stepping into something all by yourself and trying to figure it out as you go. But there's people that have been there a lot longer than you. There are people that are in the same place as you. There's a whole range of people that are walking the same path as you. So you can actually, and I don't think I've actually had a more, like I know when we have, someone coming over to our place and we have a group of people together, like that time is just so valuable and so precious that it's like, this is great because we have a common purpose in what we do. And that always encourages you.
Yeah.
And probably like also adding on to the fact of feeling, like that level of being insufficient to do something. Probably the counter opposite of that is, like when you talk about something and yet you still feel like you didn't quite get there, but God actually does His work in a person's life, and next time you see them, there's like their level of understanding just went far beyond what you told them, and you're like, this is exciting because I'm actually doing what God is doing, you know what I mean? So it's like God is actually working in someone's life, and you can literally see that before your eyes. Where you're like, because I remember with Chris, like before he even read a Bible, before he even knew anything, it's like we spoke with him a few times, and Jeremy and I were like, I don't know how that went. I had nothing. I even saw him 2 days later, and he's like, I remember this because we were walking across the road. He's like, I struggle with pride. But I found that the solution is to look unto Jesus. It's like,
That was like 2 hours or 3 hours.
yeah, it was after that one. But and you would think like, would it? Sure, probably would have mentioned something like that. But that was like, and it actually went further than that. It wasn't like just look unto Jesus, but there was like things that were like, can't think we mentioned anything about that. You know what I mean? It's like. But it's when you realise that God is now actually at work in someone's life, and He's now taking what you say to them and using it to to do His work, really. Because at the end of the day, it's like all we do is just say the message, and then God does the rest from there. Anyway, so lastly, Mel, if you're ready.
Oh, we'll give a couple of minutes break, yeah.
Cool. So have I gone into people's break time?
Yes.
Oh no, that was 10 minutes ago. That's okay.
So then no break?
No, we have a short break.
Anyway, like to summarize, it's like probably the main thing that I have learned is that like when you do step into that life, like you're now actually dealing with very, very serious things. You're dealing with eternal things that are not to be played around with, and there's no time to muck around and think this could work or maybe not. And probably the last encouragement I would give, like this is what I try to, I guess, keep it as an attitude of my heart, because I know from a personal standpoint, like I'm constantly trying to learn and grow, and I'm very aware that the journey that I'm on there is like, you know, it's like ever learning, ever growing, but you never actually arrive to where you're going. But you do that because, you know, God is actually, you know, preparing you for something great. So you gladly accept that. And I think it is very much the same attitude to this, is that it is a journey that's, you know, you're ever learning. Like, like Paul's been doing it 40 years. I'm sure you've finally arrived. No? The finish line is way
Oh,
back
yes.
there for you.
You're just highlighting the fact that I'm a really slow learner. Thanks.
I'm up here, so I get to do this. I'm sorry. So I'll stop. But yeah, like as I was saying, it is that same attitude. You realise it's like dealing with people, working with people, it is in itself an ever growing journey. You want to, like as Paul was reading at the start, it's like you want to give the most attention to learn that and actually allow God to teach you what he needs to teach you, and allow God to adjust your view and your attitude to things, because it's like what we're called to and what we're required to do, like as I said at the start, is I don't think there's anything more serious and more significant that we can give our lives to. So to make that, you know, like a constant thing to keep learning and keep growing is very, very necessary for our. Anyway, that's me done. I'm not going to keep going. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
for being here.
Well, quick 5-minute break, and then we'll get Mel up.
Was it like 40 minutes?